Jason Martell, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Forgive me for my late non-promptness here.
Oh, it's all right. Yeah, it's fine. I'm glad you made it. I'm really happy to have you on the show. You missed the intro, and yeah. So, are you ready to go? Do you have an hour?
Yes, I am. And forgive me, there's a siren going off in the background there.
Okay. Yeah. So we've got several questions we're going to go over from the forum, and actually, I've got one of our forum members on the line right now, VanFlandern. He's got a question. Real quick, I wanted to see if you had anything that you wanted to start the interview out with, if you wanted to plug anything or tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'll do a little bit of both. My name's Jason Martell. I'm 36, live in Los Angeles, California, and I've been doing research into the field of ufology for about 15 years now. I started when I was around 20, and I focused my research. Initially, I just wanted to know where do we come from, and I got fascinated with structures on Mars and realized that we have things all over the planet here that we can't answer where they came from. So it started a long quest for me of looking into these topics, and I've been doing it for a little over a decade now. And my most recent project is that I've been featured in a History Channel special called Ancient Aliens, which you can catch every Thursday night on the History Channel. And I'm working on some things in the background, which hopefully you'll also see on TV in the near future.
Really? Is there any specific area of investigation or research that it's headed?
Yes. I have launched an iPhone app that's called Paranormal Sightings Tool. And with this application on your iPhone, it allows you to report, I see a UFO, or I've seen a ghost, or an alien. And then what we're able to do as investigators is actually triangulate sightings happening in real time. So as an example, user number one is using the application, and they see a UFO, so they snap a photo, they geotag it within the application on a map, saying, I saw the sighting here, and then anyone else who has a copy of the app gets an instant push notification saying, user number one just saw a UFO. So then they could run out if they're in that area and also hopefully catch a shot or two, and then we could actually triangulate the path of a real-time sighting of any type of paranormal activity. So there are some exciting things happening, combining ancient technology and modern technology, and I think for tonight's show we'll focus on some of the ancient technology.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to go ahead. VanFlandern called in and was wanting to, we actually kind of changed the topic of the show because it was, but you're here now, and that's the important thing. So, Vaughn, if you want to go ahead, you were going to ask your question from the actual thread.
That's correct. Good evening, Mr. Martell.
Good morning. Good evening. Excuse me.
Yeah, in Los Angeles, it's morning time, huh?
It's evening time, but my mind's going tonight. That's all.
All right. My question is regarding the mummification or the technology for embalming and mummification of like the pharaohs and the people in the Sumerian area back, around 4000 BC. For some reason, what I have discovered is that technology, which is really advanced medical technology, just simply appeared in the timeline of history overnight. And my question was there anything that, in your experience, could define or lead to a question as where that came from or how that arose? Because from what I've discovered, that technology was so advanced for that time period that it's even considered advanced for even today's medical standards.
Well, sure. That leads into a good topic. I can't speak very eloquently to the mummification point of it other than to say that, yes, analyzing that from modern science perspective and how they were able to preserve the body, the skin and bones and such, falls into that line of questioning on many areas of academia that come from around 2500 BC. Specifically, what I've studied is the Sumerian culture, today's modern Iraq. In simple terms, we've had over 100 of the firsts for a modern civilization all stemming from ancient Iraq. We're talking about math, science, astronomy, agriculture, and, of course, a lot of medical information. And so my simple answer would just be, go ahead. Yep.
Let me ask you a question on the agriculture, because I'm a farmer. That area in Iraq is pretty desert and arid. What type of agriculture? I mean, I guess back at that time it was a lot different. The Fertile Crescent, there was a lot more. I guess it was a different. Is that correct?
Yes, it was a lot more advantageous to growing back then, I'm sure. But, we're also talking about a fertile strip of land between the Tigris and Euphrates Valley that they did use irrigation. Right, yeah. And from what I understand, we're talking about advanced wheats and barleys, cereals, and things that we use to make bread that are really not just found naturally in nature. And so a lot of these just kind of show up there in the southern part of Iraq. And, it just leads to a larger question of how did they learn all this, where what I do in my research is look to the alternative theory that their mythology, where they say, well, everything we know we were taught by the Anunnaki, and that term simply meant those who from heaven come to earth. So modern academia says this is the mythological part of their story, where they came from in the universe, and I look at it through a different lens to say they're actually explaining real events from their limited understanding of technology at the time.
Let me interject.
Have you found any? Oh, go ahead.
Let me interject in here, Jason. You just brought up the Anunnaki, and part of von Hellman's question online is, and now this is something that I've not heard too much about. It's touched upon in conspiracy forums here and there, but have you read or researched or been privy to information regarding these ancient mummies potentially having DNA that is not of human origin?
No, I have not looked into that myself. I know that this was something that Zachariah Sitchin is looking into, and more specifically, there's a person that I've referred to throughout my research, which is Lloyd Pye, and he's done a lot of interesting research on looking at the missing link perspective and looking at all this junk DNA that we have, this extra leftover genetic material, and just the various aspects of what makes us up. It's very interesting compared to other species on the planet.
Mm-hmm. All right, Vaughn, did you have a question?
No, that was it. Mr. Martello, I appreciate your time in answering my question, and I'm just, as a farmer, I'm interested in the agricultural aspect of it as well as the medical aspect of, as what Sancho had said about the DNA and the crops made, so that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vaughn. I'm going to go ahead.
I think that's cool that there's specific. I think it's cool that there's specific, people that have their own background, whether it be technology or agriculture or physics or whatever, and then can look at this topic of ancient technology and apply what they've learned in modern times to see, there was something happening back there. How did they learn this?
Well, a program, a TV program that's kind of brought that to the light of day. I don't remember if it's the Discovery Channel or is it the History Channel that talks about life after humans. It kind of puts it into perspective as far as, wow, no one's going to notice us after 100 years to 1,000 years. Everything's going to be gone. So it adds a new.
Yeah, I mean that's definitely true in the sense of people that you and I know today. But at least our time record of history that we see shows that maybe our evolution of man and how long we've been on Earth does go much further back than current modern science puts the date. And that's where a lot of my research currently is taking me in a direction that shows many ancient cultures based, for instance, their calendar system on a much longer cycle of time that's around 26,000 years versus our one-year Gregorian calendar that we cycle through every 12 months. It's just very interesting that many of these ancient cultures seem to have very advanced knowledge that was lost to us, and we're now just starting to recognize that knowledge because of our advances in science. And I'd be happy to go through some of those specifics with your audience tonight if you'd like.
Absolutely. I mean, the line of conversation that you just started, I've got several questions here. You're touching upon it right now, so if you want to expand on that, because, for example, I'm reading our forum member Warren B. His question was specifically, why are cultures all across the world, or ancient cultures spread across the globe, why the striking similarities, the mummification, the corn from America is found in ancient ruins globally, the pyramid structures in Egypt, China, North Africa, South America, petroglyphs that resemble each other across the world, cocaine in the Egyptian mummies' bodies. So, yeah, if you would.
Well, that last one obviously would show that there's been transcontinental trading and we have cultures on other continents. And so here's how I would kind of lead it off. You can ask me specific questions, but I have wealth of information to share. And here's basically what I feel is the answer to a lot of these megalithic monuments on just about every continent around the world. Everyone's heard of the idea of Atlantis, excuse me, that at one time there was this lost, great, advanced civilization somewhere on a continent that something happened and that continent sank, and so they're gone. Well, a more logical approach is that if they were an advanced technological civilization, maybe even 10, 15,000 years ago, they would have been a global civilization, and we'd see evidence of that on every continent. And that's exactly what we see, is that these megalithic monuments are there from cultures that say, oh, well, the gods initially built these, or our great ancestors built them. But we look at South America and we see like Teotihuacan or Pumapunku or a lot of these sites, obviously like the Giza pyramids, that, show a type of technology and a brilliance to a time period that is off the recorded record right now. Forgive that noise in the background. It's a phone ringing downstairs. So, there really is similarities on every continent for an advanced technological civilization having a footprint. All of these megalithic monuments, pyramidal structures and what have you, are usually astronomically aligned to certain star constellations and are done so in a way that here on Earth they are, for instance, lying to the exact point of where the summer solstice ends or begins. So very esoteric knowledge of the stars and our place in time as this cycle continues at a scale much larger than most people realize, which is around 26,000 years. Now, so that you understand, people hear today the Mayan calendar in 2012, and they're like, ooh, something's going to happen. The reason why that's interesting is because of the esoteric knowledge the Mayans had in their calendar system. They based it on a 26,000-year cycle of precession. That basically just means that as our Earth rotates around or orbits around the sun, we're also daily orbiting in our own cycles, day and night, as we turn around in our own spin. And so every 26,000 years, the angle at which the Earth's axis is at degrades by 1 degree every 26,000 years. So somehow the ancients were aware of this astronomical cycle, just as we track, the moon and stars that we see every day in our view of the heavens. They were aware of a cycle that lasted much longer, and somehow built a lot of these monuments around, and to pinpoint this knowledge. So that just again raises the question: how did they do this, and who could have taught them? And then we just have to at least raise that flag of thinking that many of these tales from mythology were possibly real tales that took place.
Mm-hmm. Now, you're touching on the exact things I've got questions written from forum members, and you touched upon 2012, and this forum member I know is very much into this. His name is Nemesis 2012. I've heard you discuss this a little bit. His question is, do you personally think there's a potential Nemesis brown dwarf approaching Earth, which is a possible candidate for perturbing the outer planets and causing anomalies with our sun? Could its passing through our solar system be the event predicted that leads to a new cycle in 2012?
So Nemesis is a topic that's slightly misunderstood by people sometimes, and this user seems to kind of have it. Nemesis is a theoretical planet that exists far beyond our solar system, around what we know we probably have is a second sun. And around this second sun, there's a large theoretical planet called the Nemesis planet. So let me explain all that. Basically, the Hubble telescope, in filming external solar systems, has found most solar systems are binary. They have two suns. So this led logically to say, we probably also have two suns, but our second sun is a failed sun. It's called a brown dwarf. And so more than likely that is the case based upon astronomically what we've been able to view with our data. There's a very large asteroid belt called the Oort cloud, billions of miles beyond Pluto. And beyond that dust cloud possibly lies a brown dwarf, our second sun. And so around that second sun would be a theoretical planet named Nemesis, and if it orbits that sun and is going through that asteroid belt, the Oort cloud, that could be the cause for potentially dislodging large chunks of debris over the millions of years that we see the inner part of our solar system being bombarded with. Our planets, our moon, have these large craters from debris coming in. So the theory is that might have what could have caused the dinosaur extinction is that Nemesis dislodged debris and that sent it hurtling towards our planet. And that's a cool theory, and it is very interesting. It's a modern accepted idea, but it also, again, ties very similar to a very interesting story told by the Sumerians. Just like we have the 7 days of creation in the Bible, the Sumerians had 7 tablets in stone called the 7 tablets of creation, written in their ancient language of Sumerian writing called cuneiform script. And it tells a much longer, detailed story of how our solar system is created. So, there are a lot of interesting things where, again, modern science can cross over to explain some of the things told in a very interesting, maybe a very interesting manner in other forms from earlier cultures.
So when you say Nemesis, would you also classify that as being Planet X or Nibiru?
No, I would say that Nemesis is confused with the idea of Planet X or Nibiru, but, it's a theoretical planet. So I guess if we ever actually see Nibiru or Nemesis, I don't know exactly what Nemesis is predicted to be in size-wise, diameter, but Nibiru from the ancient text is 4 to 8 times the size of Earth. So, anything that large coming in through our solar system would definitely cause a lot of perturbations and explain why some of the planets are tilted on their side, like Uranus, or why, like, Neptune and Pluto could have been possibly dislodged moons of Saturn. This is all accepted space science that they're, trying to answer today. And there's a lot of things that can be answered in our cosmology by simply including one intruder planet that caused all these great effects.
Mm-hmm. Now, there's a Japanese scientist that he has a working theory that mathematically there is a 10th planet out there that's, 3 to 5 times the size of Earth. Now, my question is, we're seeing an increase, whether you go on the mainstream media or the alternative news networks that are strictly news, they're having a report on the increase in earthquakes, the increase in seismic activity in general, the increase in volcanic activity. Have you run across anyone discussing the potential of Planet X or Nibiru causing this effect?
Yeah, of course. There's everyone under the sun on the internet predicting that Planet X is going to come in 2012 and that I'm imaging it now with my webcam, or that all the latest earthquakes and effects are caused because it's near the sun. Unfortunately, I just don't concur with any of that information. There's a lot of amateur astronomers out there that have been very astute at seeing things even before the professional community. Hale-Bopp, Shoemaker Levy 9 that broke up into 9 large fragments and impacted Jupiter. NASA said, it's nothing. Nothing's going to happen. And then amateur astronomers snapped off photos that showed marks left in Jupiter that could fit 4 to 8 times the size of an Earth, in the impact zones that these things left. So I'm pretty confident that if there is something 4 to 8 times the size of Earth anywhere near our inner solar system, the amateur community is going to see it and will be able to track that pretty far out before it would, cause any dramatic effects.
Now, you believe that the Anunnaki do live, based off of Sumerian texts, they do actually live on Nibiru, correct?
Well, I mean, based on what the Sumerians have left us in their stone artifacts and diagrams, the information that they say, yes. So, they depict another planet. They basically have depicted all of the planets that we currently know of, the size and distance between them, even the color of these planets, which we didn't know until we sent Voyager and Galileo out there in the late 70s and early 80s, and said, wow, they are bluish-green planets like Pluto and Neptune. So the Sumerians have extremely accurate knowledge of the solar system. However, they speak of certain other things that our science has yet to confirm, like the existence of another planet, and yes, on that planet live beings that have, in fact, spawned our current human civilization. And so that's at least the story written down by the Sumerians, and this is the kicker, is that all the tales we have, for instance, in the modern King James Version of a Bible, where it once says there were giants upon the earth, or God made us in His image and after His likeness, these are all derivatives of earlier texts found in a Sumerian version written in stone that has been unchanged to this day. And those just much more clearly detail this interaction of these beings and the knowledge that they bequeathed to the Sumerians. So it's very interesting, at least it has been for me, to go through this knowledge and kind of go, how can this be? Yet, we still have yet to find Nibiru or meet an Anunnaki, but we do have a long trail of evidence of their knowledge to say, wow, they knew things that's just not possible since there was no preceding culture before them that could have even taught them this.
What do you say to people that would say, it's impossible, if this planet exists, Nibiru, it's so far away from the sun, how could anything live that far away from the sun?
Well, that's actually a great question, and that answers and brings up a topic that's been widely discussed around these beings, the Anunnaki. Not only are they depicted with wings, but all the references in the Bible where you see angels with wings, and they also have a glow, a halo over them. The Anunnaki were said to have a glow about them because of their planet was a large glowing planet. I don't know if it's a product of what you eat, you are what you eat, but they actually had a physical glow about them. We see natural luminescence here on Earth in certain bugs like fireflies or eels under the water. So it's very possible that their planet had its own luminosity to it. And the story explains that the Anunnaki originally came here to mine gold. And they told the Sumerians that on their own rise to a technological civilization, we saw they conveyed it to them as we understand it, they started to ruin their atmosphere, similar to what's happening today here on Earth. And so they found that they could grind up gold and use it as an insulator, spraying it into their atmosphere to help pass these atmospheric holes. So they came here originally to do that mining of the gold, and that at least explains why they initially were here, and touches on many purposes for how they assessed the gold that was here and said, wow, mining it ourselves is not fun. Let us make a being fashioned from the Neanderthal hominoid that was already evolving naturally, and we'll put our genetic marker on it, making him in our image and after our likeness, and dumbing him down, making him not as strong, and he'll be used to mine gold for us. And then they created a very primitive worker to do just that, and the story goes on from there.
So you do believe we were seeded or created?
I do. I personally believe that theory, and I base it upon what I'll explain to you now as quickly as I can, because I know we don't have a lot of time tonight. The simple answer is the Darwinistic perspective of a missing link says that, well, there's a Neanderthal man, this large, big-boned being that existed, and then there's us. So there's some missing link. There's some connecting species that can say, oh, look, here's the transition. It doesn't exist. So an alternative theory that exists today is called genetic intervention, that someone put their marker and said, we will modify that being and fashion it into what we have today. And there's so many genetic anomalies around our code and our strands of DNA to the junk DNA to just various pieces of, for instance, brains have a genetic partition, meaning everyone kind of commonly knowledge knows we only use 3 to 10% of our whole brain capacity. That's a bummer. It's every other species on the planet, even insects, use their whole neural network. Why do we have a genetic partition? So there's a lot of anomalies on the science side of why they explain they made us in their image and after their likeness, but they didn't want us to be as strong, like a big ape, or as smart, using the full capacity of our brain like they could probably do. So they, made us in their image and after their likeness, but to be their slaves. And there's just a lot of modern science that shows that, for instance, the first mitochondrial DNA shows up in southern Africa about 300,000 years ago, which simply means that females inherently pass a certain type of DNA called mitochondrial DNA that doesn't change. It doesn't mutate over time. So it's a good way to see our genetic marker and how far it goes back before it's mutated. And it goes to 300,000 years ago, which coincidentally coincides with the time the Anunnaki said they originally came here to do the mining of the gold. So there's just a lot of little pieces to the story around, us being genetically engineered.
Now, the genetics angle is like a can of worms. I mean, it's something that's just, there's a lot of multiple questions regarding that. The Anunnaki, one of the questions I'm actually reading right now is, in ancient times, it seems like all across the world they were worshiping reptiles that came down in skyships. So would you classify the Anunnaki as reptiles? I mean, I know you read the online conspiracy forums, and everyone's talking about reptiles and the elites of the world being reptiles.
Right, that's David Icke's research. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, to be honest with you, there's a 6-foot iguana sleeping about 4 feet from my head right now in this room. So I'm cool with the lizards. I have not done any research about the reptilian species. From what I understand, the Anunnaki, there are no references at all to reptilian in any of the Sumerian texts. There are no reptilian diagrams of Sumerian depictions of Anunnaki with reptilian references that I'm aware of. Most Anunnaki have a headdress that's bird-like and are with wings to represent they have the power of flight. As an interesting analogy, when we landed the first, astronauts on the moon, it was Houston, the eagle, has landed, and the Apollo 11 patch is an eagle landing on the moon. Now, I doubt 6,000 years from now, they're going to look at the Apollo 11 patch and go, what were those Americans doing, putting birds on the moon? So the Anunnaki are depicted by the Sumerians simply with wings to depict that they had the power of flight, not that they had wings.
Now, that is interesting. I remember the Apollo 11 patch. That was the bird landing on the...
You can just Google it and you'll see it. It's right there. Yeah, it's real easy.
Where did the Anunnaki go? Why are they not here now? Or are they?
That's one of the top 100 ufology questions, probably in the top 10, is where are the aliens? Why can't we see them? I have no idea why the Anunnaki are not here, but why they left, at least explained by the text, was simply that there were wars between different factions of the Anunnaki. And so when they left, all the high priests had no more God to turn to get sacred information and have that written down. And so they said, we must build idols of our gods so that we can worship the image of our God until they return. And we do that to this day. So I don't know why they have not returned. My answer to that would involve modern day's ufology cover-up over the last 50 to 60 years, and we're now being slowly desensitized, and that's why you can see things like Ancient Aliens on the History Channel. I'm very grateful to be a part of that special, or that series. But 10 years ago, you're not going to see that on the History Channel. Today, you do. Tomorrow, maybe we'll meet some extraterrestrials. So there is something happening.
It definitely seems like we're moving toward disclosure, and you touched upon that. If you had to throw a date out there, I mean, how far off would you say you believe disclosure would be?
I can't answer that, unfortunately. I'd be throwing a coin into the wind. my personal feeling on that is simply that it's even hard to answer that. But I'm just going to go with it by saying that I believe there's already a technological space society happening now for humans, and basically the Earth population is on quarantine. We're the ones not having access to all the fun that's happening out there, and it's because we're at a primitive state, still killing each other and using resources that kill the planet, let alone being able to accept our own race and our different colors and backgrounds, other species. It's extremely sad, but hopefully we are making changes in the right direction. And I really would hope that there would be some intervention here, some kick in the butt to say, hey, look, guys, you all have a lot more in common than you think, and you should probably just hurry up and get along. Yeah.
I agree.
But I don't know why that's not happening, but I do believe that it's happening now in the sense that integration with extraterrestrials is a worldwide phenomenon, completely oblivious to the human population in mass, meaning, we have no idea what's going on, but if anyone does their homework, every government around the world seems to be involved with utilizing extraterrestrial technology. I don't say that they're hiding in aliens or that they're, building UFOs. They probably all are, but what I see is that there seems to be global companies that somehow license proprietary technology to companies, which in all sense and purposes is actually extraterrestrial. If you look at some of the minute details of the latest things around the U.S. Air Force's craft, like the B-2 bomber or some of the stealth technology, there's just a lot of things that people don't even realize that we're already using things like, the ability to make things lighter than air, levitation of objects, like the wings on the B-2 bomber are using some type of anti-gravitic device that make the wings lighter than what they actually are. And so there's a lot of this that it's not like I'm letting a cat out of the bag, because just Google it. It's right there. However, not everyone's aware of this at a global level. But there are things coming out in mass over time that shows the fact that, we've been involved with beings throughout history, but in modern times, it's slowly kind of it's slowly coming out in the wash, if you will, and everyone's going, well, it's been going on all along, but they had their reasons for covering it up, and, well, I guess it's okay. I don't know how it's going to play out, though.
Right. Now, you bring up something interesting about the technologies. Do you think that everyone goes back to Roswell? Oh, the technology comes from Roswell. The technology comes from Roswell. Do you think that it precedes that? Are these people that are patenting and coming out with these technologies, do you think they have access to older Sumerian tablets that have been kept hidden and potentially?
That's a great question. Great question. Well, the answer is yes to both. I want to get back to the Roswell question because that brings up something very interesting revolving time travel, and it introduces a variable that will just kind of spin your mind. But what I believe is happening is that definitely we've been finding Stargate-type technology, like the TV show on the Sci-Fi Channel, Stargate. Hopefully everyone's aware of that. That type of technology, I believe, has been discovered, extraterrestrial artifacts that just do amazing things. But, of course, they're quickly classified and swooped up off the public, perception of or knowledge of their existence. And we see remnants of things like that happening in Egypt with the director of the Antiquities Plateau, Zahi Hawass, who continues on the forefront of any discovery, but there's a lot of things in the background that show that, he's quick to dismiss all the really cool stuff, and it never gets shown on TV. I don't know why, but there is definitely a track record to say, yeah, of course they've been losing anything in history that has been found of merit on the technological scale. Roswell, as an example, is an interesting tale because of the fact that, yes, more than likely, in my opinion, it crashed. There were beings. We found it, we were very excited to be able to reverse engineer exotic technology. The new variable in that equation is that ship was actually not what we think of as a spaceship. It was actually a time machine. It could basically go to anywhere, anytime. It could travel through dimensions. It's something that we don't understand. Let me rephrase that. It's something that I don't quite understand well enough yet to give you an answer other than that. But it's very interesting to think about the research that Philip Corso, who has an interesting track record of actually saying, look, it was my job to take the technology and to apply it to patents that could be used for modern things we have today. So he's dead. He wrote that book on his deathbed. His son took on that flag or that torch. And one of the interesting parts of that story is that they said they kept sending the craft back in time to 1947 with adjustments and advances so that each time they would discover it again, they would reverse engineer it faster. So you play that into the fact of ufology of saying, wow, what if we have time travel as just a tool and someone lets off a bomb and, a nuclear bomb in L.A. or a bunch of aliens invade the Capitol? Well, we'll just go back in time a week and fix, however that was the cause. So that's a whole new variable of even contemplating what modifications have been done to the fact that the timeline we're on now could be so modified, who knows what's going to happen next? 911 was a variable, as an example, that no one can explain. I would assume a lot of people would agree in saying that I'm iffy that it was terrorists. Something happened there that wasn't cool. And so there are things that can be thrown into our equation of reality where it's like, whoa, wait a minute, how did that happen and why? So, the time travel one is definitely an interesting variable to add to the Roswell crash because it brings in a lot of new variations to what could happen.
Now, when you say, because it's touching upon one of the questions our forum members asked, you actually believe that our society right now is being manipulated. An event happens and they go, wait a sec, we don't want that event, and we go back in time and they change the event. Am I hearing you correctly?
I'm putting that out as a possibility. I'm not saying that I believe in it 100%. I'm just saying that if you listen to the research from people that are of credible interest, like Philip Corso, again, just Google him, then, he wrote a book called The Day After Roswell. And if you look at this stuff, again, by doing the research and weighing all the data, we won't be having this conversation with anyone asking that question because it's very clear that there are things happening, yes, for sure, but, the public at large is not being made aware of this via MSNBC or on the New York Post.
Oh, absolutely. I agree. Absolutely.
So it's people like yourselves that have an interest and do the research themselves rather than just taking the word of someone who might be considered knowledgeable.
That's excellent advice. Where is your research taking you now? Where is your latest endeavor taking you?
Well, the latest area that I'm interested in is called celestial time, and it's this idea that the ancients were aware of a time scale that spans 26,000 years. Just like everything happens cyclic here with our seasons, we rise and go to bed various hours on the same schedule. The seasons change on the same schedule. Things happen at a galactic level on the same schedule. And so somehow it seems that many of the ancient cultures wrote information into their architecture or their texts about things that revolved around this time scale. When was a good time to plant harvest? When was things to be best in your nature or not? And a lot of the stuff I just don't understand yet, but what I do see is the accuracy of their architecture, their monuments, being astronomically aligned to certain constellations, their math being displayed and how they align these to the perfect alignments of the summer and winter solstice. There's just too much accuracy to dismiss some of the other areas that they talk about, and that's why when we hear things like the Mayans saying, hey, in 2012, we're going to have an actual ending of our calendar, and so people say, wow, does that mean the end of the world? What's going to happen? So there brings in a lot of variables, but just touching on that as an example, the Mayans had actually 3 calendars, and on one of their calendars, they made predictions. It was called the long count calendar. And several of these predictions have not always been right in the past. Now, one of them coming up in the future is that, our time's going to end and there's going to be a shift in many ways. I don't think it'll be a bad shift, but who really knows? In the past, they predicted, for instance, on a certain date, it was called, a Baktun, one of their dates of prediction, that their god Kukulkan Khan was going to return. And they were stoked. They're like, man, Kukulkan Khan's going to return. This is going to be a momentous day. And it turns out on the predicted timetable for Kukulkan Khan to return, these ships appeared on the shore that they'd never seen before, these great ships. And these white people stepped off, and they were like, wow, this must be Kukulkan Khan. And it was actually the conquistadors, and they aggressively converted and wiped out all the Mayans and aggressively converted them to Christianity. So unfortunately, they weren't always correct with their predictions, but their knowledge of their calendar system was much more accurate and much longer in duration than what we use today. So, it is an interesting thing to see what will happen in 2012, but I have no idea what that will be.
Now, you've touched upon the pyramids. I've got a question about the Giza pyramids, and I think you've kind of talked a little bit about it before, but do you believe that they are ancient power generation sources, and can you go into a little bit of detail about that?
Well, I know there's an author named Christopher Dunn, who I had the pleasure of lecturing with in Amsterdam a few years ago, and he wrote a book called The Giza Power Plant. And there's been a lot of esoteric research that suggests, if these pyramids were built by a pharaoh, then the walls should be full of inscriptions to his praise, Khufu. This was my coffin, this is my life. But there's none of that in any of the Great Pyramid, like the Great Pyramid or the other two, Queen's Chamber and such. At least that's what they call it. So it's interesting to think that the pyramids probably had some other purpose rather than just being a large tomb. And what raises the question really is the geologic, astronomical evidence that shows there's connections to much older dates. So, as an example, the weathering on the Sphinx and the inner walls of the Sphinx shows large amounts of water, like extensive raining, took place to cause these surface features that you see in the walls and in the inner walls of the Sphinx. Yet there's not been any large amounts of rain or water in Giza in 10,000 years plus, Great Flood era. So that raises a question. And then two is the fact that using star charts and computer mapping software, you can tell when star constellations are going to be visible in your night sky. You can do that going ahead in time so that, tomorrow night I'll be able to see the Orion constellation. Cool. You can also go back in time and see when there were visible stars in your area. So it turns out that if you run a simple program like Redshift on a PC, that in 10,000 BC, 10,500 BC, on that exact date, the Orion constellation is right above the three Giza pyramids, and the constellation of Leo is east, directly in the gaze of the Sphinx. So what we have is an actual terrestrial map built by the pyramids and the Sphinx at 10,500 BC, mirroring what's happening in the sky. The Sphinx is looking east at the constellation of Leo, a lion, and the Giza pyramids are lined up with the Orion constellation, which is 3 stars in a row with one slightly offset. So That's at 10,500 BC, but Egyptologists say the Egyptians built the pyramids 2,500 BC. Who's right?
Absolutely.
I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it definitely. I mean, you can. It definitely. To me, I would just being a layman on the subject. It's I have to use my common sense, and my common sense says 10,500 years from the evidence.
Right. And that's what we try and base our opinions on today. I think is what we understand of science and logic today, and say, yeah, that seems logical.
Now, recently with the alien disclosures, you can turn on the mainstream media, and it doesn't matter which channel they're talking about the dots in the skies. And recently on Russia Today, they had a woman off of Blog Talk Radio. I forgot what her name is, but she mentioned the Palladians. And have you ever looked into the Palladians or what they are, or whether there's any ancient discussion of them like there are regarding the Anunnaki, and whether or not they could...
Go ahead. Forgive me, please. Whether or not they could...
Well, you discussed the Anunnaki fighting and basically destroying each other, or to a point where, let's all split up and go our separate ways. It hurt, the battle hurt good enough, so we'll just take a break. And so that's the reason I was curious about the Palladians, if you do see them as another type of Anunnaki, or if they're even mentioned. Is that something that's even relevant?
Yeah, I don't know. I know that they're another Nordic type of race discussed in modern ufology with cases such as Billy Meyer, who met Senjaze and said she was a Pleiadian. The Sumerians have texts that, for instance, show the 7 dots and a crescent moon, and modern linguists that can translate Sumerian say, oh, that's the 7 sisters of Pleiades. However, the research that I have done with Zachariah Sitchin says that the 7 dots and the crescent moon in the Sumerian writings is actually referencing Earth, because of the fact that we're on the 7th planet, the sacred number 7, 7 days in a week. If you think about coming from outside of our planet in, starting at Pluto, Neptune, all the way in, Earth is actually the 7th planet. So it's kind of an interesting question for sure.
Now, you're making the rounds as far as, we've all seen you on the History Channel, and you've been really becoming or making this mainstream. Have you run across anyone warning you away from discussing topics or potentially going too far in depth with a particular topic?
Not at all. Not at all. But I will give you a little history on a topic such as that, which is not so nice. First of all, I have never had anyone directly spying in my bushes or tapping my phone or mysterious people coming to my door and brainwashing me. Nothing like that has ever happened. Simply because everything that I discuss is in the public domain. I don't get any first-hand evidence, or I'm not out there uncovering real ancient technology that's classified. I'm simply basically just doing research and presenting existing facts in a different light. Now, there are people, however, that do take the angle of ufology into modern science and say, what are the latest craft that are flying out of air? What are the latest classified research or things that the military is using and try and gain photos or access to that technology? And then you have problems. And so in my time of being interested in these topics, my focus is on ancient technology. But my interest is in ufology overall. And so I've been involved.
Jason, I've got to stop you. Can you repeat the last? I think you're on a cell phone, or possibly
I'm on a cordless phone, but I'm going to go downstairs to get better reception. Sorry about that.
It's been really tolerable, so I didn't really want to. But the last few sentences, I didn't.
Okay. It's because I start talking about classified stuff, and my phone. I'm just kidding. So basically, there's a lot of interesting things happening that I think that in general there are some secret organizations or classified research being done, that the public is not supposed to be aware of, that they don't want released. And there's a multitude of reasons, from terrorists could get a hold of it and misuse it to most usually a monetary value being reduced in someone's pocket, and so that's not going to happen. But I think that there is technology that's being utilized today that is extraterrestrial, and it is an interesting situation that we find ourselves in with what's going to be happening in the future with even the way our economy is heading in the U.S. and such.
Huh. Now, you touched upon with the stealth aircraft we have, basically being lighter than air, lighter than air technology. Have you investigated structures like the monolithic structures like Baalbek and Baalbek, I believe. Yes, and others that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry to cut you off there. I was just going to say real quickly before I lose my point. I will discuss some of the megalithic monuments, but just to get off not to get off the topic of the scary side of ufology, I have been lucky enough to be involved in several investigations or cases that the people I was doing this research with have had interaction with nefarious factions of organizations that basically literally stopped us from doing certain things. I was part of a team that had access to actual Roswell debris, and there were thousands of dollars spent on double-blind tests with like prestigious labs like Los Alamos Labs and SDSU and New Mexico Tech of these samples, meaning double-blind, meaning we're not telling you what it is, and you just test it and give us the results. And this thing was completely extraterrestrial in origin, and we tried to do a live webcast. We tried to do a special with the Sci-Fi Channel, and this was two separate things that happened separate of each other. But both of those had interference that we can't explain. And in the first event, my friend was literally taken in a van and driven around for 11 hours and told, "You're not going to do this for these reasons."
Oh, my God.
And so, I can only relay that as a story to you or to your listeners, and it might sound something like, well, maybe he's lying or he's not, but I'm not doing that to impress you. I'm simply stating that, yes, there have been things that I've been involved with, that these topics do have a sensitivity area if you go too far with things that might infringe on new technology or new science that's not on the market today for a various multitude of reasons. But I'm not in that field yet, so I personally have nothing to worry about or have had any issues.
What was it that you tested?
It was a piece of the Roswell spacecraft, an actual piece of debris that's still under possession from, one of my friends. So
did it?
You can actually. There's a clip of it on YouTube. If you just type it on YouTube, Jason on Sci-Fi Channel. It was a show called Proof Positive where we also had it tested, and the debris that we submitted to the studio for testing was not what they tested and showed on camera. It was just a normal piece of silicone. It was not what we gave them. There's just a lot of weird things that sometimes happen around these topics, and there are reports that come out of these events, and I'm skeptical to all of them, because unless I research it myself and experience it firsthand to verify it, you really don't know. And so that's the great thing about the research that I stick to, which is ancient artifacts and ancient knowledge, because it's usually something that exists in a museum, an artifact you can touch, a picture you can click on and verify is real, and compare it to your own knowledge of what we know today and see that, yes, this stuff goes far back in time and has never been dislodged from us, meaning we've never been disconnected to beings that are not human. And as a simple analogy, as to kind of wrap it up for tonight, I have 5 pets. I've got an iguana, a couple of birds, some turtles, and I treat all my animals like they're royalty, meaning even when I'm not home, they know they're safe. They know that I've got their back. Humans do not have this. We have no connection with anything above us that says, we've got your back. It's all good. You've got your problems and you're hungry or whatever, but look, at the end, it's all good. Somehow we're disconnected from that, and it would be really cool to have that connection.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree. Do you have a few more minutes, or are you gonna?
I do. Yeah, I have a few more minutes for sure.
Okay, I didn't want to keep you too long, but what I do is I usually reserve a 2-hour spot, and I just however long it goes, it goes. And
I unfortunately only have about an hour this evening, but if you want to keep me for another 5 or 10 minutes, I'd be happy to answer a few more questions.
Oh, great. I would really appreciate that. So on to the monolithic structures and how they moved the giant rocks. Can you touch on that?
Well, I can theorize on it. That's one thing that we've been tackling in the series Ancient Aliens currently on the History Channel. And, there's evidence of these great structures all over the earth of these trilithoton stones that weigh at least 1,000 tons each.
And so these trilithiton stones are shown in places like Baalbek in Lebanon, or in Jerusalem where the Great Wall is built, the Giza pyramids, or Pumapunku, or Tiwanaku, Teotihuacan. There's a whole bunch of them all over the planet of these megaliths. And so we can't seem to replicate that today, meaning we have no crane that exists that can move these rocks. And more specifically, as an argument like for the Giza pyramids, any type of monument that we would undertake of that scale today would require an equally large quarry site and machinery in place in that quarry site to actually lift and move these rocks. In ancient times, there are no quarry sites that contain machines of equal latitude for what we would use today. So then they start to wonder, well, how the heck did they move these stones? There's something we're missing here. And then putting them on some wooden blocks and trying to push it and stuff, it seems that there was probably some way that they either did not move the blocks as we traditionally think of it and somehow molded the rocks like cement clay blocks kind of being molded one after the other and set in place, or, and we'll discuss that in a minute, or that they were using some way to, make these rocks literally lighter than what they were so that they could literally just kind of slide them along or push them along very easily. The research that I've seen the most logical answer to is that these rocks, the ones, for instance, like at Pumapunku, where they're very finely fit together without any mortar, they're just seamless, they're perfect, it seems to involve what's called vitrification. And vitrification is a term which means heating of the rock to such a point that it almost becomes molten, and then it's moldable, kind of like mud or clay. And that's exactly what we see with these rocks, as if they were molten to a point that they could be palatable and shaped and then set in place where they would then harden. And there's many reasons why we say this, and some of the reasons are because even the smaller rocks that are put into place, if they were already of a set size and stacked, the weight of these larger ones would crush them. But that's not what we see. They seem to have been compacted into place. So it's a really interesting theory to say, well, how in the heck were they then heating the stones to such a temperature that they could do vitrification, slice it like just taking a stick and running it through the mud to make a symbol or a diagram and then having it dry. They seem to have been using a technology, possibly, to heat the stones, mold the stones in a way that we don't know how they were doing it currently.
But that is really interesting. I've never heard of the vitrification theory before, and it seems very plausible.
Everything we talk about tonight is wonderful because the answer to that is Google. Anyone who's interested in the things we discuss, it's all available. Even if it was something that I had invented, which unfortunately it's not, I would have put it up online and I'd say Google it. But yes, you can just Google vitrification and kind of understand more about this process and how we use it today, and realize that there is a lot of discussions on the internet proposing that as an idea for a lot of these monuments.
Jason Martell, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Forgive me for my late non-promptness here.
Oh, it's all right. Yeah, it's fine. I'm glad you made it. I'm really happy to have you on the show. You missed the intro, and yeah. So, are you ready to go? Do you have an hour?
Yes, I am. And forgive me, there's a siren going off in the background there.
Okay. So we've got several questions we're going to go over from the forum, and actually I've got one of our forum members on the line right now, VanFlandern. He's got a question. Real quick, I wanted to see if you had anything that you wanted to start the interview out with, if you wanted to plug anything or tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'll do a little bit of both. My name's Jason Martell. I'm 36, live in Los Angeles, California, and I've been doing research into the field of ufology for about 15 years now. I started when I was around 20, and I focused my research Initially, I just wanted to know where do we come from, and I got fascinated with structures on Mars and realized that we have things all over the planet here that we can't answer where they came from. So it started a long quest for me of looking into these topics, and I've been doing it for a little over a decade now. And my most recent project is that I've been featured in a History Channel special called Ancient Aliens, which you can catch every Thursday night on the History Channel. And I'm working on some things in the background, which hopefully you'll also see on TV in the near future.
Really? Is there any specific area of investigation or research that it's headed?
Yes. I have launched an iPhone app that's called Paranormal Sightings Tool. And with this application on your iPhone, it allows you to report, I see a UFO, or I've seen a ghost, or an alien. And then what we're able to do as investigators is actually triangulate sightings happening in real time. So as an example, user number one is using the application and they see a UFO, so they snap a photo, they geotag it within the application on a map saying, I saw the sighting here, and then anyone else who has a copy of the app gets an instant push notification saying, user number one just saw a UFO. So then they could run out if they're in that area and also hopefully catch a shot or two, and then we could actually triangulate the path of a real-time sighting of any type of paranormal activity. So there are some exciting things happening, combining ancient technology and modern technology, and I think for tonight's show we'll focus on some of the ancient technology.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to go ahead. Von Hillman called in and was wanting to, we
analyzing that from modern science perspective and how they were able to preserve the body, the skin and bones and such, falls into that line of questioning on many areas of academia that come from around 2500 BC. Specifically, what I've studied is the Sumerian culture, today's modern Iraq. In simple terms, we've had over 100 of the firsts for a modern civilization, all stemming from ancient Iraq. We're talking about math, science, astronomy, agriculture, and, of course, a lot of medical information. And so my simple answer would just be, go ahead. Yep.
Let me ask you a question on the agriculture, because I'm a farmer. That area in Iraq is pretty desert and arid. What type of agriculture? I mean, I guess back at that time it was a lot different. You know, the Fertile Crescent, there was a lot more. I guess it was a different. Is that correct?
Yes, it was a lot more advantageous to growing back then, I'm sure. But, you know, we're also talking about a fertile strip of land between the Tigris and Euphrates Valley that they did use irrigation. Right, yeah. And so from what I understand, you know, we're talking about advanced wheats and barleys, cereals and things that we use to make bread that are really not just found naturally in nature. And so a lot of these just kind of show up there in the southern part of Iraq.
Actually kind of changed the topic of the show because it was, but you're here now, and that's the important thing. So, Vaughn, if you want to go ahead, you were going to ask your question from the actual thread.
That's correct. Good evening, Mr. Martel.
Good morning. Good evening, excuse me.
Yeah, in Los Angeles, it's morning time, huh?
It's evening time, but, you know, my mind's going tonight, that's all.
All right, my question is regarding the mummification or the technology for embalming and mummification of like the pharaohs and the people in the Sumerian area back, you know, around 4000 BC. For some reason, what I have discovered is that technology, which is really advanced medical technology, just simply appeared in the timeline of history overnight. And my question was there anything that, in your experience, could define or lead to a question as where that came from or how that arose? Because from what I've discovered, that technology was so advanced for that time period that it's even considered advanced for even today's medical standards.
Well, sure. That leads into a good topic. I can't speak very eloquently to the mummification point of it other than to say that, yes, and, you know, it just leads to a larger question of how did they learn all this, where what I do in my research is look to the alternative theory that they're mythology, where they say, well, everything we know we were taught by the Anunnaki, and that term simply meant those who from heaven come to earth. So modern academia says this is the mythological part of their story, where they came from in the universe, and I look at it through a different lens to say they're actually explaining real events from their limited understanding of technology at the time.
Let me interject.
Have you found any? Oh, go ahead.
Let me interject in here, Jason. You just brought up the Anunnaki, and part of von Hellman's question online is, and now this is something that I've not heard too much about. It's touched upon in conspiracy forums here and there, but have you read or researched or been privy to information regarding these ancient mummies potentially having DNA that is not of human origin?
No, I have not looked into that myself. I know that this was something that Zachariah Sitchin is looking into, and more specifically, there's a person that I've referred to throughout my research, which is Lloyd Pye, and he's done a lot of interesting research on looking at the missing link perspective and looking at all this junk DNA that we have, this extra leftover genetic material, and just the various aspects